I was glad to work with the vice president in forming 6 separate task forces, which had some of the most knowledgeable people in the country coming together to deal with education and climate change and healthcare and the economy and criminal justice and immigration reform. And these folks, needless to say, people who represented the progressive movement had a different perspective on things than did Biden's people. But there was serious discussion and I think a real honest effort to come up with a compromise. And I think the compromise that they came up with, if implemented, will make Biden the most progressive president since FDR. It did not have, needless to say, everything that I wanted, didn't have everything that Biden wanted.
If it's implemented, you have to put that in, right? Because he knows in this moment that he's looking to the camera that it will be pretty much like a party platform and discarded the moment that he gets in office. Joe Biden knows that the overwhelming majority of the people who are voting for Joe Biden are doing so in order to avoid Donald Trump getting in office, not for anything that Joe Biden himself is pushing. It is the complete and absolute distillation of blue no matter who, and you have nowhere else to go politics over the last 40 years, that you end up with a Donald Trump versus a Joe Biden. Both people who are massively and entirely out of sync with this political moment and the potential and opportunities for this political moment. Parties that are serious and legitimate about the things that they believe in take moments like this and use those things, especially parties on the left. There is nowhere for this energy to necessarily go in the political circus. And so it becomes just kind of outside of the political space, drifting, looking for something to latch into in politics with various political actors looking to take advantage of that energy being outside of the political space and trying to channel it back in. I understand that a lot of these people are looking to get rid of Donald Trump. Fair enough. I don't like Donald Trump either. But you really need to consider your political system and whether or not it is healthy to have a political system where you are basically falling into this camp of, I don't care what that person is talking about from the standpoint of policy. I just need him to be a placeholder to get rid of the other guy. And what that means going forward is at any point, if you're on the left, that you actually believe that you're going to get some policy that you want. For 40 years, you've bought into blue no matter who. You have nowhere else to go. This narrow-focused pragmatism where they convince you that in this very specific moment that the only thing in the world that matters is this election, and the world is going to end the moment that this election ends. And they convince you to go incremental. This guy's least worse than the other guy. Missing the point that over the context of time, your country does have a political momentum associated with it. And the political momentum in our country has been decidedly to the right. So people who were Republicans are now basically just Democrats. And Republicans have just gotten batshit crazy. And the thing is, because each generation sees it within the context of that generation, it doesn't entirely view and see the shift. Every 4 years, you get stuck into elections where you are not necessarily voting on something in the affirmative. Even when you put Obama in office, you put Obama in office thinking he was going to be somewhat of a lefty, and he was not that. He was just the typical random Democrat that's just a neo-lib, just like Bill Clinton, and just like Hillary Clinton would have been, and just like Joe Biden will be. It is appalling, nauseating even, seeing Sanders put his name associated with this. Sanders, whatever you want to think of him, and I think the world of him, missed his moment. Even when your campaign ended, your campaign shouldn't have ended. And I know it sounds weird to say that, but it is true. There is such thing as, I know it sounds weird or base, but topping from the bottom. Basically, yes, you lost from the standpoint of the election. No, you didn't necessarily want to do what was necessary in order to get what you needed to do. And yes, they knew that you were too weak to really push hard and go hard against the party. I mean, for God's sake, you would even call Joe Biden a liar when Joe Biden was lying. So there's that. By the same token, what do you believe in? And I earnestly and honestly believe that Sanders full well believes in the things that he was pushing, even if he didn't necessarily have the stones, in order to fulfill and to behave like the sense of urgency that was demanded for the things that he was talking about. I still think he does believe those things. I do think on some level, when you are in a political space, just like when you're in any other particular space, there's an element of this that transcends the reality of the events. Meaning, a relationship with Joe Biden ends up transcending the fact that people are either on the streets or millions of people are without health care or millions of people are being crushed by poverty. Yes, I know it sounds ludicrous to say that, but clearly that is literally what just took place. The relationship itself mattered more to him, and because it mattered more to him, here we are, adrift. And the question becomes, what gets accomplished? And I will tell you this, what did not get accomplished is Medicare for all, legalization of marijuana, $15 an hour minimum wage, the elimination of student debt, free student colleges and universities. Those things that the majority of the public wanted did not get accomplished. This is a dog and pony show every bit as much as the Unity Reform Commission. And the fact that Sanders is putting his name to this is utterly and entirely appalling. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to do so. So I want to go through a few super chats that I missed once before. Marcus Will, if Black Lives Matter don't need to consider COVID-19, why should kids? Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Look, many of the people that I saw at the protests were wearing masks. I mean, I do think there's a difference where lefties actually do believe in the whole COVID-19 stuff, and so they try to protect themselves versus right-wingers that don't. But, okay, fair enough. Let's risk our kids. Bernie putting the DC friend above the movement. Oh, what is this? I can't see the whole thing. Damn it, YouTube. All right, Pop Reality. I'm sorry, I didn't see that one. As a black man, if I refuse to vote for him, can't do it. I'm not voting for him either. I won't vote for Biden if it's the planet and our income will suffer. I do not have to vote for it. Pop, I agree. 1,000% agree with you. Marcus Will, you were gone for a few days. Welcome back. Thank you, Marcus Will. Yeah, I had to get a surgical thing. I have an access that allows me to do treatments over the course of the week, and the access stopped working. I mean, I've had the thing for like 20 years. And so I had to go to get it checked. And apparently they could not declide it because apparently they said it was badly clotted. So that's where basically the pain was coming from. But on top of that, because they couldn't declide it, it's going to have to get surgery. Now, in the meantime, they had to put in a thing in my throat yesterday. So that's where I was gone, unfortunately. Yeah, limitations suck, but they can be transcended. All right. The Biden thing. Look, I look at this election as basically blue no matter who being distilled into its most visceral and drastic expression with two counts. One, with Bernie Sanders being on the left and being so drastically concerned about the issue of basically not tanking it or not losing it to Trump because he considers him a maniac, that he was willing to basically throw himself on the altar to be sacrificed, as opposed to actually fighting as hard and as virulently as possible for the victory. Now, the reason why I say it that way because between the two, Sanders is the one that cares the most. And the fact that he cares the most is used against him, as opposed to the one that don't care as much, which was the Democratic Party, because all of them were willing to tank it if it meant losing, if it meant Sanders not taking it. Meaning Sanders was never willing to go that far. From his standpoint, I am not going to be the person that loses this election to Donald Trump. From the Democrats' part, are you willing to go to a brokered convention and rip it out of Sanders' hands? All of them, yes. We are willing to lose to Donald Trump if it means stopping Sanders. Well, right then and there, you can see that there's a fundamental imbalance in the way that people are viewing this particular event. And I would even say Sanders is even misunderstanding this event, going from the standpoint of what the public wants him to do and what would take place if he did it. Meaning, if he went full-throatedly against the Democratic Party, this is not a situation where the concern is that the Democrat is going to lose after it because they had a vigorous campaign. He may think that, but that's not necessarily what happened between Clinton and Obama when them two were going after one another. It oftentimes makes it just very clear and inoculates each of the people, depending on who wins, to some of the attacks that they may get as they go forward in the campaign. Considering how bad Donald Trump is doing, it would have been a moot point because Donald Trump has just been doing that poorly. On the second side of that, though, it's ending up with Joe Biden and Donald Trump because both of them are basically out of sync with the American public. I'm making the point that this is basically blue no matter who distilled into its worst aspects as it got worse and worse and worse from election to election to election. Eventually, it'll be Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton. But focus for the moment on Trump and Biden. Neither of these two men are within the context of this political moment. Both of these two men are out of sync with what the American public wants. And even from the context of the arc of time, I mean, the arc of history is long and been towards fairness, but let's just be clear, it takes somebody to actually bend it that way. It's not doing it by the sense of just kind of magic thing of happening. It takes movements of sorts, but it also takes this level of receptibility to those movements that we don't seem to no longer have. Put it in context. 30 million people are currently out of a job. I just was reading the report earlier. If that many people are out of a job, that also means those people don't have health care. And that's within a pandemic that is resurging and is only getting worse. While that pandemic is surging and getting worse, you have the Trump administration basically pushing governors to send people back to work as soon as fast as possible, including putting our kids back in schools. Congress, up to this point, has shown no interest in doing anything about the housing apocalypse that's about to take place, where millions of people are going to be thrown into the streets. That's just taking place at the end of the month. That's also around the time the stimulus is going to run out, which, again, people were using just for the most barest of subsistence. That's also going to run out. That doesn't even touch the 132,000 people that are dead from COVID-19. This is Sanders' moment. Meaning this is the moment for somebody like Sanders, who basically seemed to be several months out of sync. And even beyond the whole thing of being out of sync, not necessarily being up to the snuff of doing what was necessary in order to run against the Democratic Party itself. He would enunciate certain things, but it would be vague and it wouldn't necessarily be entirely targeted. It's as if he made a conscious choice not to do anything to trespass on the whims of the party, missing the point that the party, anything that you do, they're going to hit you for it because they don't like you. It's aggravating, that's all. Look around for the moment. Wherever you are, look around. Everything that's around you requires some level of human labor. It requires somebody to make it the intricate details of the item. It requires some kind of mental physical stamina in order to turn something that was somewhat of a conceptual idea into an actual product that gets made, mass produced, pushed out, and you can buy it. Even the device to which you buy it on, even the device to which you're looking at me now on, all of the things that went into just making that particular device work and getting that device in your hands. Even the people who are pouring the coffee or serving the food to the people who are making those devices. Even the air that you are breathing, the place that you are living in, required labor, not just to build it, but also to ensure that it was up to standards and to ensure that the air was clean. Now, consider for the moment a company. And a company comes into business. It has a building that, again, has to be checked to make sure it's up to standard. It has workers who were educated by our public education system that drove on roads that were built by government streets, by public services, that had buildings that were protected or put out a fire, like Amazon that just caught on fire recently. Well, the fire department came and put that building out. You have people who go to shop at those stores, who work at those stores. And despite all of these interconnected things that all require some level of public service that it was taking place in order to make those things come into existence, 95% of the income goes to the top 1%. And beyond the income gains, 95%, Trump is going to best that number, but in spades. Everything is so interconnected and requires all of these aspects of labor. How do we justify giving that much wealth to a small body of human beings? It's obscene. That's the point I'm trying to make to you. The notion that a small body of human beings, despite the fact that 300 million of us, or how many of workers are in this country, make all of this stuff function and work, and that they would have zero cash if it was not for people shopping at their stores, or for that matter, building the products and putting those products out. Or for that matter, having a road that allows those products to travel on. Or for that matter, having a fire department that puts out the fire when it goes down, or a police department to protect them, their wealth, their buildings, etc. I'm making the point that our society is interconnected. And within the context of that society being interconnected, one series or one aspect of this society has basically hijacked the political space and have turned the faucet specifically into their direction, despite the fact that their role in this is minor in regards to the way things actually operate. Is it right? Is it fair? Is it just that 95%, or basically under Trump, virtually all income gains go to the top 1%? And even if you go to the 0.1%, those numbers get that much more grotesque. If it is not, then how can you justify to me that it is wrong for us to make the pitch that says we should have Medicare for all, a public health service? If they're not going to pay those workers that money in wages, that money needs to go towards public services in order to restore what we can call a new social contract. Now, the person who should be able to make that argument is the guy who's sitting here in the video, who's getting nothing, who basically had his name as the only thing that he could give for leverage at this point, and have even that be traded away for nothing. That's what this joint task force is. Nothing. Even saying it in and of itself, when you made the point, if it's followed, because you understand fully that just like platforms, nobody, no campaign ever goes and says, okay, what do we promise to do in the platform? No campaign ever does that. I'm making the point that a new social contract, a new idea that the American public can look to and says, this is what it means, in some part, to be us. We've evolved such as a society where we realize our society is interconnected, and it is utterly grotesque to have somebody making $1 trillion, or for that matter, having $170 billion. That money needs to be invested into our particular community, our society, to make our society that much better. We've evolved to that point. You're the person to make that argument. You're the person with the righteous indignation and fire to stand on stage and say, you're the one who put that stuff on the map in and of itself, because it wasn't something that people were talking about. Medicare for all wasn't on the map. I'm making the point that giving yourself over to Joe Biden in this way because you're so terrified that Donald Trump is going to run away with it and then you're going to get blamed for it is a fundamental misunderstanding of the way politics works. Your leverage, your strength is by not doing that. Is by basically saying, I am for Medicare for all. Joe Biden needs to be for Medicare for all. 88% of the public support it. Joe Biden needs to come out here and to explain why he is against the policy that 88% of the public supports, if indeed supporting that policy would unify the party and organically beat Donald Trump. Why is he against the policy that has that much public support? That's what you should be doing. I'm making the point that that doesn't hurt him. That makes him stronger. If indeed he accepts those policies, that makes him stronger going into the general election, not weaker. This, what you're doing here, makes him weaker because it makes it look like you got squat because you didn't get squat. And in getting squat, you want your people to give over everything. And those people in no way should do it. The responsibility of getting those votes belongs to Joe Biden. And if indeed he's not going to be willing to accept policies that the majority of the public support, then why should he get that support? And why should you give your name over to it? I understand you're buddies with him, but this is an utter betrayal. Bernie Sanders has done great things in regards to getting these subjects on the agenda, but he is not the person to be emulated from the standpoint of signs of strength and signs of political acumen in that system. If he is sheepdogging, meaning got into this process from the beginning with the understanding that at some point he was going to cobble his people together and give them over to Joe Biden, that's horrendous. I have a hard time believing that that's not what took place now. Now, the reason why I say that is, if you can't call a liar, that's a problem. If you're in a campaign and you're running a race where you are fundamentally working within the constraints that are put on to you by a ruling class, then you're going to lose. And the entire point of the constraints or the constraints around you was to ensure that you lose. You bouncing around within the construct, it doesn't really matter how much you bounce around in it. The whole point of it is to have you contained in a box where you can't go but so far. And if you agree to those rules, you're going to lose. And it seems like you agreed to those rules. So you couldn't call a liar a liar. You couldn't make the point that Joe Biden was lying about civil rights, that he got caught for it in the 80s. You couldn't make the point, or you could make the point about Social Security, but that was always a counterattack, despite the fact that Joe Biden was always lying about that subject. Sanders has done great things for putting this stuff on the map, not taking anything from him. But this is nauseating to watch. And at this point, this appalling thing of blue no matter who, this is where it has come to, where 70% of people who are voting for Biden are doing so entirely just to stop Trump, not for anything that Joe Biden is doing. That is a sad way to go in our politics. And yet, that seems to be where we are. Let's see. Pop reality. I gave money I didn't have. Oh, refund Bernie. Jimmy was right. Sheepdog. Yeah, Pop. Tim Black screamed at me and said Bernie was selfish to put the DNC friendship above the movement. It is selfish to put the thing above the movement. Beltazar, if Trump had gone the way of Spaceballs and merchandised the fuck out of Make America Great Again mask, Biden would have lost in a landslide in November. That's hilarious. Yeah, it's just difficult to watch. That's all. Like, you must understand, there's no point to our existence that we know of. From an entirely corporeal point of view, there's no point. Which, you know, and on top of there's no point, there's no ultimate point of view. Like, if we're making a comparison, I can't tell somebody that they're wrong for saying that they love capitalism. It's their point of view. It's subjective. We can only have this kind of argument on things that happen in objective reality where we can point to and compare what they're thinking of to whatever's taking place in objective reality. And that place you can get a true, false, or somewhere in between in regards to what they're saying. Um, there's no objective guidehead that says yay or nay on this stuff. We have points of view that we bump around in and that we try to cobble together to come up with some kind of workable point of view in the way that we pursue our affairs in the world. That has certain problems, right? Right off the bat. Who's right, who's wrong? Especially if you're getting into the notions of ideology and how we should organize our affairs. What I do know is, because of such, there is no point. And because there is no point, we end up in a society that basically isn't going anywhere. So we as human beings have the opportunity to choose. What do you want to do? You're radically free. But the catch is we're not radically free because there's certain constraints within the context of our culture, our society, the belief systems, things that we have as incentives in that society. All of those things come into play that put constraints on what we believe or what we can do, or for that matter, even imagination. The thing is, if you are radically free, what is the point of choosing a situation where you basically have to scramble constantly? Like from cradle to the time that you drop dead, most of us are in a situation where we are either poor or terrified of being poor, with a small sliver of people who are comfortable and a smaller sliver still who are masters of the universe. But those masters of the universe gets more like 50% of basically own everything. Now, I'm asking, if there is no point, why is that the point? And is that the point that you should be focusing on? Meaning, if there's no point to any of this, do you really want to spend your life toiling away in order to make somebody else radically profitable while you scramble and have this replicated family to family to family all across the United States, and for that matter, all across the world, with like 80% of the world being poor? Is that the point that you want to fight for? Is that the society, the system that you want to work in, where 95% of all of your wealth and all of the resources that we all create go to the top 1%? And if there is indeed no point, should we come up with a different point? Is it possible, even if it's not necessarily a radical shift, to move in the direction that actually makes that better, to makes that less onerous, less horrific, that makes sure that somebody's not walking around with $176 billion when we are so interconnected that everything that goes into making him that much money means that the people who are below him are entirely deprived of that, despite the fact that the people below him are infinitely necessary for him to have that wealth? These are questions that should be asked. This stuff is not religion. This shouldn't be taken as acts of God. These things are basically acts of policy that allow some people to benefit drastically more than others. Not to mention the historical legacies of slavery and whatnot that just kind of be dragged along without actually ever dealing with it. Will we let a rapist get away with a rape and a crime? And will we and accept the idea that, well, hey, 10 years passed, so that rape shouldn't matter? I don't think so. But that's what we're basically asking people to do about slavery. It's like you get to the point where they start off saying, yeah, we'll get to this later. We'll get to this later. We'll get to this later. Then it's, well, I mean, it's been this number of years past. I mean, it's past that point. Well, I hate to tell you this, the consequences haven't necessarily went past that point, and those consequences apparently have not been told that X number of years has taken place, so people should not care about it. Yeah, look, very basic point. If you're living in a world that doesn't have a very specific point, which it doesn't, and you don't have a God telling you how it should be, which we don't. You don't have a king saying it must be this way or that way. We do not. Yes, we're radically free. But within the context of that radical freedom, there's still constraints that we are still stuck with from the standpoint of traditions, cultures, ideas, even from the standpoint of the limitations of cash and wealth because those in and of themselves have a certain freeing mechanism associated with having those resources. In a world like that, does it make sense to give 95% of the income to the top 1%, or worse, more than that to the top 1%? That's going to take place under Trump, or that would take place under Biden. And is it possible, to any degree that's possible, to move in a direction that makes that process better? If we are so interconnected, which we are, and if it takes roads, it takes education of the workforce, it takes fire departments, police departments, it takes clean air, it takes all of these mechanisms in order to make our society, just to get to the point of being able to set up a business in the first place, that person didn't earn $176 billion, that person stole $176 billion using the legal apparatus in order to make that theft perfectly okay. They pay off politicians. 90% of the races go to the side with the most cash. Those politicians turn around and take the positions and perspectives of the policies that were in their interest in getting the cash in the first place. And then it becomes a legal thing that they can do in order to get that much cash. I'm asking more so of a larger question in regards to the way our society is organized, and should we have our society to organize in this particular way, if indeed it is not working to the interests of the population itself. That's what I'm getting at. And I'm saying our society and the way that we've organized it needs to change if that much of the resource distribution is being ferreted and expropriated to the top, when it is infinitely necessary for all of these mechanisms of society to work that this company in no way paid for, in order to even get to the point of having an employee in the first place. We're interconnected. Someone walking around with $176 billion is obscene. And the notion that Bezos is going to hit a trillionaire status. Do you realize the people who are billionaires in this country have gained nearly $500 billion, with 30 million people being out of work? What do you think is going to happen from income inequality for something like this? And if you have a system that allocates wealth in that way, don't have health care, don't have, all of these people are walking around without health care at this point in the middle of a pandemic. Do you think that's right? Do you think that's beneficial? Do you think that small crust of human beings should own that much of the wealth distribution? And if you don't, then you need to start looking at a larger thing about your system and in the way that system works, and the changes that could be made to that system to make that better. Now, people may disagree with some of the changes, but I would say that the fact that the rich have gotten off monstrously over X number of years, that there should be something that's paid back to the American public for that. A universal basic income would be one of those things, but that UBI needs to be untethered to anything else. Your birthright is having this. There are other reasons that go around that, right? If you are a human being and you're born into this planet, this society, this particular culture, that child didn't ask to be born. And if we believe that children have value, which I keep hearing right-wingers say, should that child be given something from the standpoint of the state to ensure that that kid will have at least a bare minimum of subsistence in regards to the floor of how that kid is raised? Meaning we need to start taking responsibility for our society standpoint in regards to the way that the people live their lives in our society. And part of that, I'm getting more so to the point of economic justice as an avenue floor for the people of your society. This is what I'm calling an evolved society. This is why I put such a big deal behind things like Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and so forth. Part and parcel to the reason why I wasn't pushing for reparations during the time Sanders was running, because I thought if you have these policies might be universal, but the people who are at the bottom end of the income distribution scale benefit that much more because they were in that much more desperation of poverty and not having access to those things in the first place. And by the same token, they were also universal, so everybody could partake of it because there are more whites on welfare than there are blacks. There are 70% of whites in this country only make up 13% of the country. So I was thinking, from that standpoint, those things were better. Those things are also in the cusp of the moment, considering the number of people who are out of job, the number of people who are out of healthcare, the number of people who have no even thought of when they will even be able to go back to a job, let alone having resources in order to pay for the situation which they have now. We're at an inflection point. You already have, tens of thousands of people out on the streets, and the best that you can get is Joe Biden, who at this point feels pretty fucking spotless because of how bad Donald Trump is doing with this, so he doesn't think he has to give anything over, with Sanders basically agreeing with him, coming up with this nonsense. No, this is not the moment where you should be kowtowing to Joe Biden on this nonsense. Your response should be, every fucking lefty's response should be to balk at the idea that during a time like this, Medicare for all with 88% Democratic support would not be the thing on the agenda. How? How do you not have that as one of the tip of the spear of sorts? And how does you, if your name is Sanders or anybody else, that back Medicare for all to automatically be okay with this, considering 88% of Democrats support it? How do you accept that? That's what I'm trying to get to. This is why I kind of make the point that the balloon around the who stuff is nonsense. Your ability in order to influence the political space is not after they get in office, it's before they get in office. Sanders, right now, is doing a massive disservice. Whether or not he thinks he's doing it right or not, it's doing a massive disservice to these particular issues because you're going to utterly and entirely demoralize a large number of people who actually believe in those policies and who right now, at this particular moment, who know those policies are popular and get Joe Biden and see you kowtowing to him in this nonsense for policies that are dramatically underwhelming and that will be tossed when he gets in office. How do you walk away from Medicare for all so quickly? 88% of the public support it. If Democrats support it, 70% of the public. And then that's just one issue. How do you walk from that? If you have that much support for an issue and you are still losing, when will you ever win? Like, I fundamentally don't understand what the Democratic left think they're getting out of this. And I mean that in real terms, where you literally win the argument and still get squat after you lose the race. And at what point does that change? Is that not a fair question? I'll end it here. Let me get these last ones. John Siner. I bet we beat Jeff Bezos like a priest. What is that? Oh, like a panada, until his money comes pouring out like candy or blood or whatever. Much love. Thanks again, MMT content. Yeah. Totally cool. Thanks, John. It was clear from the start that it was BS. Oh, that Bernie Sanders wasn't a threat. The establishment understood that the public wants an outsider to step in. Bernie Sanders was an outsider in rhetoric only. Marcus Will. Yeah, Marcus. I'm beginning. Yeah, I agree. And of those concessions is moving Biden climate deadline from 2050 to 2035, not only beyond the scientist's deadline of 2030, but his term too. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, we'll all be there, but, great. Bernie Sanders should not have taken any more money. Selfish. Look, it looks like Sanders basically accepted certain constraints and ran in the race. And in a moment where it looked like people were lumping onto him, he was completely, basically neutered because he could never do the things that was necessary to wage a political campaign in the way he would have needed to wage it against a party that was just dramatically against what he wanted to accomplish. So I can't necessarily say any of you are wrong in your assessments on this. I would say his language and everything else gave voice to what a lot of people knew was in the States, but didn't have proof of it until he ran. But I do think this is a massive disservice. Your moment, in this very specific moment, and believe it or not, it wouldn't have hurt Joe Biden. It would have only helped him. It only hurts Joe Biden if Joe Biden doesn't want to accept a policy with 88% support. But if he doesn't want to accept it, that's on him at this point. You're standing on the side of the public. You are trying to pursue your objectives and your political aspirations, even if you can't win, to basically set your imprint, where you try to force the opposition to take over and appropriate various things that you realize that the public wants. Without the ability to pursue that, you're just kind of there, leaving you no power in the process, with the exception of maybe your name, to which they would like to have on it, but it's not a requirement, especially now with the overwhelming majority of the people just saying we're willing to just vote for whoever in order to get Trump out of office. But yeah, it's nauseating to watch. Like, share, and subscribe.